Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a new landlord, or just curious about property investing, this is the podcast for you. Sponsored by the Co-Living Collective, your trusted partner in creating vibrant and sustainable shared living experiences. Visit us at colivingcollective.com.au to learn more.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host, as always, Neil Gibb, and today I've got a man on the podcast who has come to this country and has not blamed the lack of resources available to him. He's been incredibly resourceful to build a HMO portfolio, which is kicking out some really, really good cash flow. Today, I've got Arie from HMO Unity in South Australia. Arie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me today, Neil. Appreciate that.
Very welcome, mate. I was going to try and pronounce your full name, but it's going to be difficult for me. So do you want to give us your full name?
So it's Arie Kolesnichenko.
And where's that name from?
So the surname has Ukrainian backgrounds, but I was born in Kazakhstan personally. But my main first language is still Russian. So it's pretty much a mix of blood, you know?
Bit of everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
And how long have you been in Australia for?
It's been my 6 years now. I've moved to Australia at the age of 17 without a family. So it's definitely been a journey.
6 years. So that means you're only 24 now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow. I actually didn't know that, mate. I thought you were a little bit older than that. So this makes it even more impressive what you've achieved so far.
Thanks for that, Neil. And thanks for hosting me. I actually appreciate giving the opportunity because I'll be honest, I'll admit it's my first ever podcast that I do. So it's a great honor to be able to share some of the insights in the market, but also, I guess, potentially inspire some of the guys of a similar stage in life to go there and actually achieve more in life. So thanks for having me, for sure.
Very welcome, mate. I set this podcast up not only to entertain, educate, motivate, and inspire other people, but to connect with other people that are out there doing great things. And me and you jumped on a call briefly last week for about 15, 20 minutes. And I was like, wow, this guy, he's kicking some goals. Oh, we definitely need to record a podcast. So, and I didn't actually realize you were 24 at the time, mate. So you've been in the country 6 years from Kazakhstan, and you built a HMO portfolio without the need of the banks.
Yeah, that was the case. And I've only got my permanent residency like 6 months ago. So in the last 5 years, I've been here on all the visas. And as you know, they may restrict you with certain things. So yeah, it's definitely been a challenge for sure.
Insane, mate. Insane. I always think back to the quote that Tony Robbins says, and that's how I started the podcast. You can always blame your lack of resources, or you can be resourceful. And we've done a few rent-to-rent deals back in the days, not as many as you, I don't think. You've outshone me on the rent-to-rent front. But today we're going to talk about how you can take control of somebody else's property and create cash flow from it, so that you can replace your income at the age of 24, 25, whatever age. When you don't have to worry about the banks, there's really no limit on what you can achieve in terms of cash flow, right?
For sure. And like the goal of becoming like financially free was definitely the goal of first moving to Australia, thanks to, you know, Robert Kiyosaki and his resources. But having low capital in hand, definitely I didn't have many options to choose from. And HMO has definitely proved itself as a good strategy for those who don't have much cash on hand and actually limited in terms of the financing options to be able to start up a company with quite a bit of cash flow.
Yeah, well done, mate. Well done. So why Australia? What was the pull to bring you over here?
I did have my extended family in Perth that I visited a couple of times prior to making a move here. You know, I didn't think twice, to be honest. I've been overseas, but I've never think anything exact as Australia. So I definitely saw that as land of opportunity. So yeah, and here I am, just being a real life example of that. So
real crack. What about visa requirements? Was there any visa requirements or restrictions that you had when you first come to the country?
Yeah, but it wasn't too much of a challenge, you know, because I've started on a student visa. And the main requirement is that, you know, just being able to financially support the education here. So on that alone, I have great pleasure and great thanks to my parents for being able to actually subsidize all of that. And then I've just got lucky with finding my love partner here, which I married 3 years ago, which actually allowed me to then transition to the resident visa as well. So yeah.
Beautiful, mate. Beautiful. And what did you do when you first came to the country before you got into the HMO space?
So the Perth was the first city I moved to because of that extended family. I was hoping I could get some support from their side. So one of the requirements was before enrolling into uni that I complete a year of foundation degree, which basically just upskills your English language ability, but also just gives you a bit of basics in some of the technical subjects as well, and just pretty much highlights on how the Australian university system operates, because it is quite different to other countries. So I've completed the first year of college in Perth, and then made a strategic move to Adelaide for some of the migration opportunities here as well. And the choice fell on the University of South Australia, majoring in business, specializing in finance, and I graduated from that a couple of years ago.
Beautiful. And were you doing any part-time work when you were studying at uni?
Oh yeah, for sure. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to live in the country. My parents did have financial ability to support my tuition fees, but they were quite limited. So we've actually made an agreement from the start that all other expenses to do with living, like the roof over the head, food, entertainment, I'll be carving out of my pocket. So when I was limited to part-time employment during studies, I was maxing it out, like having 20 hours a week of part-time employment, being a waiter, bartender. And, starting at the age of 17, I've only been earning, I think, $13 an hour at one of the Japanese restaurants. And if you max out 20 hours a week, you're not left with much, So, and then after uni, I transitioned full-time employment and did a couple of years in corporate as well. So
Awesome. So how did you come across the HMO opportunity, and what made you think, I'm going to have a crack at this and see if I can make this work?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess going back to my journey, and for the sake that I didn't have much cash on hands, when I did live in Perth, the first 6 months I did stay in student accommodation, but the price tag on that is quite hefty. So didn't take me long to make a decision to actually move out with another friend and get a 2-bedroom apartment close to uni campus. And it was a 2-bedroom, 2 en-suites apartment. We were able to actually cut the renting costs, I guess, in half. But that wasn't still enough, with making $13 an hour, I was still not able to cover the rent. So I was actually taking some of the money from the savings account, which were supposed to cover the educational stuff. So quite quickly, I've decided to, out of necessity, I will actually rent out my bedroom I was personally living in, and I will just move to the living area for some times. So what I was doing is, and people don't believe that, but it's actually the fact, I've been sleeping on one of the IKEA foldable mats. So it's like a yoga mat that folds out. So I was taking out in the evening, just sleeping over on that and just folding it in the morning. And off I go to do my college and part-time employment. So, so I actually slept in the shared area, But it wasn't too much of a problem because I wasn't spending too much in the house anyways, because I was juggling a few commitments at the same time. But the privacy concern was definitely the biggest one, because I didn't have access to the bathroom unless I actually went past one of the tenants in their beds, So, but somehow they agreed to that, So I didn't mind that. But yeah, actually allowed me to for the rest of my time in Perth to live rent free, which was a big relief, because I could actually start saving now instead of just joining the savings. So when I was making a move to Adelaide, I straight away realized that instead of getting the same scenario and living in the shared space, why don't I get a 3-bedroom house, get 2 of the guys, take 2 rooms, cover the rent, and here I am living rent-free in my own private bedroom with all the amenities, right? I'll be honest, it did take quite a bit of time. I think I did take 3 months just to find the property that not only worked for that model, but also the agent who would actually let a student take on the property with an idea of then renting out rooms, but also me not having proper rental history because I'm still new to the country, So that's definitely been one of the challenges to start with. So luckily I did have some cash on hand, so I finished the property, connected it to utilities and stuff, and the model proved itself right. I was actually living in that property alone for 4 years before we moved with my partner to the property that we've purchased by ourselves. So while living at that property and sharing with other guys, I've actually, despite me actually wanting to do that because of the financial need, I actually have some long-lasting friends out of that I still keep in touch with. So I definitely saw more than a single benefit of such a co-living environment, and when people were actually like rotating, more and more I started realizing that there is a lot of demand for such accommodation, and also that some people were actually quite surprised to see that it was professionally managed. So despite me only having one property, I was still keeping it quite professional. I had agreements in place. I was still lodging the bonds with the government services and stuff. Tenants were still getting their receipts. We had the property looked after, cleaning, gardening, handyman services. Everything's been taken care of. So, and they've been paying one inclusive fee that includes all the utilities as well. So I've been sharing with the full-time young professionals, and they just loved the convenience of all of it. So after the first year living in that property, I've started looking into the HMO space a bit more, thinking, why don't I get another property and do the same thing without me actually moving into that property? And I started just looking up on the internet ways how people actually do that. And I came across the terminology used quite popularly, broadly in the UK, HMO, right? So I've started digging into that. The first podcast that I've come across is actually Rent to Rent Success by Stephanie and Nikki Taylor. Yep. So their company HMO having definitely got me inspired. I've also got a couple of books by Nick Fox on HMO Property Success, which also allowed me to actually dive into the details and I guess the financial model behind that. So with, I guess, a few books in the podcast, I actually got inspired to then tackle on other properties, right? So, and once again, it wasn't easy the first few years, that's for sure. But
I then approached the negotiation on these as well, because you've come from Perth, right? You've moved to Adelaide, and you said it took you about 3 months to find that first property. Luckily, you had a little bit of cash on hand because you were living rent free. So I'm guessing you were just squirreling money away and getting yourself built up capital base there. How many properties did you need to negotiate on before you got that first one in Adelaide?
To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it was like to the number of 100. It was quite a bit. I was actually quite active in terms of going to the open inspections and stuff. So yeah, firstly, I was actually having that face-to-face conversations with the agents, explaining the whole concept to them. It was quite a few. I mean, to these days, it doesn't take me that much work because I've got a proven record that it's been all running well. I've got, I guess, 30 references from the 30 properties under management currently. So it's not as difficult as it was in the early days. And I guess I've also been fine-tuning my sales speech, but some of the points that we've used to negotiate on this, I guess, I was actually quite happy to share some of the profits that I would be making from the property back with the landlord. So back at that time, when rents weren't skyrocketing that much, landlords actually didn't mind, I guess, $20-30 on top of the requested rent. So they're quite attuned to that. Some of the other things that I used as a sales speech from the start is that I would actually provide professional management of the property, that there'll be contractors involved. So not only the cleaning and gardening will be taken care of throughout the lease of the property, not just for routine inspections, but we also had some of the handyman services involved as well. And that kind of just helped the landlords with their management as well, because we didn't bother them with, the change of light bulbs or like with the dripping taps and stuff. So we're actually taking on those kind of maintenance on ourselves. when it's to do with the major stuff, obviously we still engage them and let them know. But for the small stuff, we actually didn't bother them. So there are still some properties that I'm renting, let's say, for 4 years now, and there hasn't been a single maintenance request I've actually put forward to the landlord. So they definitely see value in that. I've also been offering longer term leases as well. I mean, reading and listening to the podcast, I did know that potentially I could get up to 5-year leases. But to be honest, we had some traction with that. And the maximum I was able to secure the 3-year leases. But most of the landlords agreed to like 2-year leases max. And it's not necessarily because we didn't have those potential increases in the rent that were included in the lease after 12, 24 months. But it was more regarding the long-term plans. They weren't sure if they wanted to keep the property for so long. So it was hard to find someone to commit to more than 3 years. And I guess the last negotiation point that I've used, because the properties that we've been targeting are like the multiple bedrooms, like 4 or 5 bedrooms, right? The people who were usually applying for those properties, it was either the 5 individuals just grouped together, but it was a bigger hassle for the property management agency because they would have to do or include everyone on the same agreement. Then if somebody leaves, they'd have to change everything, bonds, etc. So we were still the middle person that allowed them to just have us as a one point of contact for all things with the property. So it's either that or it's a big family, right? Like 2 adults, 3 kids, 4 kids. And on that point, I had another selling point that me renting the property to young professionals, which the majority of our subtenants are, the property is actually going to be looked after better. It's a stereotype that the HMOs, there is a lot more wear and tear on the property. But with the right systems in place and with the right people in place, that's actually proven to be the other way. If you look at the schedule of the young professional, they just get up in the morning, they leave for work, they come back in the evening, they just want to unwind. They have some takeaway, not even use the kitchen much. Despite the family who, like with the kids, obviously it's another story. So those sales points definitely help us to secure properties as we went along with it. So yeah.
Beautiful. Well done. You speaking my language there. A lot of the things you're saying is a lot of things I've been saying for a very long time. And like I said, we only spoke for the first time last week. So let's recap on some of these negotiation points. So you approach it as a professional company and say that you want to take a long-term lease on there. Struggle to get sometimes a 5-year lease, but a 2 and a 3-year lease works fine. Pitch it so that it's a benefit for the agent. They only have to deal with one person instead of having to deal with 4 or 5 people if they're renting to a family. Less wear and tear on a property because you've got working professionals who work all day, come in at night, have a shower, get an Uber Eats potentially, go to bed, wake up the next day, rinse and repeat. And you offer the owner more than the market, so $20 or $30 more than the market, and you take care of all small maintenance items, light bulbs, etc., stuff like that. So they only take care of the major items like the oven breaking or the hot water system breaking.
Yeah, of course. But I guess, and just to the thing that actually covers all of that is just, I guess, the communication I had with the agents and the landlords. They actually appreciated someone with the professionalism in mind, because not only I've been registered with like the Real Estate Institute of South Australia and licensed with them, I also knew the policies that apply to, or like the Residential Tenancy Act, from to back. So the language they were speaking, they knew that not only I was actually understanding that, but I didn't have any arguments with agents because I know how it works. So they actually appreciated that as well. So they didn't waste any time with the communication piece when like letting know of routine inspections. They knew it's going to be all ready to go. So yeah, just to sum it up, yeah, the communication was definitely a big part of it.
Perfect. And the what about compliance? Because each state in Australia has different compliance. You've before we get into compliance, there was something that you swept over it really briefly, and you mentioned the number of properties that you've actually got with a head lease on them. How many is that?
So we've got over 30 properties, and they're spread across 3 capital cities, so Adelaide, Perth, and Brisbane. We've only recently moved to go to interstate and actually test the waters there, maybe 5 months ago. In those 5 months, we've been able to secure 5 properties in Perth and a couple of properties in Brisbane. It's definitely been another challenge being able to actually have the right trusted team of contractors and people like property manager assistants. But in terms of the overall property, it's just 31 properties. The majority of them, I'd say 80% of those actually rent to rent. And I've just recently started actually acquiring properties on my own as well. In terms of those number of properties, in the last 4 years, when at the time of me starting it, we've actually saw 100% year-on-year increase. So we've started with 4 properties 1 year, then in another year was 8, and then 16, and now 30. So it's definitely been some growth within the portfolio.
Absolutely. Let's just stop for a second and let's just take this in, right? You've been in the country 6 years. You're 24-year-old. You're originally from Kazakhstan. You've now got over 30 properties in 3 different states across Australia that you don't even own, but you're generating a decent amount of cash flow from each one of these. So financially free by using other people's properties.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in terms of the turnover, I'm actually proud of that. We've got a 1.75 million every year.
Wow.
And with, I'd say, 10 to 15% of the profit margin before tax. So there's definitely some of the cash flow coming in. But, in the last 4 years, it's all been reinvested dollar to dollar back into the business. So I'm not saying that I actually had reaped the benefits yet, but I'm definitely on my way there.
Yeah, well done, mate. Well done. Let's talk about compliance then, because each state has a different number of people you can have in these properties, different building classifications, etc., etc. How have you done your research and got the right information based around that stuff?
Yeah, so the good thing is with Adelaide, at the time of me starting it, there's already been a provision in Residential Tenancy Act for so-called rooming houses. So that's how they identify them, HMOs here in Adelaide. So the way that these rooming houses are defined is pretty much any house that's occupied by at least 2 separate individuals. But when it gets to the house with at least 5 rooms used for the rooming house purpose, actually becomes a requirement to be registered with the state, right? So on that piece, it's a recent addition as a policy in Adelaide, and at this stage it only involves undergoing training that us as a registered proprietors of these rooming houses have to undergo. But eventually I think it will evolve some of the other things as well. In terms of the compliance, we didn't have any issues. We're still pretty much being very ethical in terms of we use the property and to the number of people we actually let it occupy. So when we were taking on the property, we made sure that we're still staying under the classification of the National Construction Code of being classified as a building class 1A, which didn't require us to do any of the fire compliance essentially. But just out of the goodwill, we've still installed the smoke alarms in the bedrooms, and always had fire extinguishers and other blankets and stuff in the common areas just for the people to use in case they need to. Luckily, we didn't have a case where they've been actually used. In terms of the compliance differences with us actually going interstate, we definitely see that it does take a lot to actually get your head around how the policies are framed for these HMOs in other states. Perth definitely offers a lot more flexibility. Not only you can charge 4 weeks as a bond, where in Adelaide you're only limited to 2 weeks as a bond, which is sometimes not enough. In Perth, you're actually not bound by the Residential Tenancy Act, and you can actually opt in for the common law agreements, which is a big help. We've still kept it under the Residential Tenancy Act for the time being, but down the track we might decide to switch to the common law as well. But I guess in terms of the Queensland market, Queensland definitely seems to be a lot more established in regards to multiple occupancy and dual occupancy properties. So the Residential Tenancy Act there quite explicitly covers these rooming houses. So in terms of that piece alone, I do anticipate that Adelaide and Perth will still see some changes in regards to compliance. But if you focus on Queensland and just frame your business from the start, that it's not only meeting the compliance, but it's also quite thought through, like people do in Queensland, you actually protect yourself from the start. So
absolutely, mate. Good stuff. Good stuff. Let's talk about demographic and the difference in demographic across the 3 states as well. Are you seeing the same demographic of tenant across all 3 states?
I would say there's not much differences in there. I guess the majority of our subtenants, I'd say the 80% at least, are still full-time young professionals, either from overseas or, from the interstate migration. The rest are like the full-time students that are opting to live in a HMO instead of the student accommodation provided. Usually they have their own reasons as well. In terms of the other demographics, I would say that the average age of the subtenants is ranging between 25 to 35. Mm-hmm. But we do have individuals over the age of 50 as well. But on that piece alone, I guess, when we do select the subtenants for the rooms occupied by the HMO, we always consider the current demographics within that household as well. So we're usually trying to mix up the genders as well, and we don't exclude anyone. So we don't have all the female housing, but despite many people actually approaching me asking for that. And if we do have, let's say, a 5-bedroom property where 3 bedrooms are actually occupied by 3 guys, potential will actually be preferring 2 females to occupy the other 2 rooms, because otherwise we actually run into the complexities of finding a female who wants to share with 4 guys, for example. So it's definitely make it easier to mix up the genders and the age as well. But when it comes to the aging, the age is not a big part of it, but I guess the people with the right personality, the mindset, I guess, and over the same stage in life as well, we've noticed that if a household, let's say, if it's full of 4 early 20 guys in their early university careers, and we let a 50-year-old guy move in there with a different stage of life, there are still some arguments evolved out of that. So we do have households that are just a bit older than others, but usually it's young full-time professionals that opt for such accommodation. In terms of the other demographics, I'd say that it actually varies in terms of their income abilities as well. Because initially when I was opting for such accommodation myself, I thought that the majority of people will actually be choosing these out of need because they want to either can't afford it, or just want to save more funds to down the track get a place of your own or something. But I've realized quite quickly that some of the tenants who were moving into one of my rooms, they were actually being financially set even better than I was at the time, because if you look at their cars, they're just pulling into the driveways and the garage. It's just like, it's amazing. Yeah. So I've definitely realized that there is definitely a bigger range of people that such accommodation is of interest to. Some choose it obviously because of the affordability aspect. Some choose it because they want to just, they're a bit financially smarter. They just want to, sacrifice in the short term to eventually, let's say, buy a house. So it doesn't take them 5 or 10 years setting up. And some of it actually choose for the social aspect of it as well. Because coming from overseas myself and being an international student, it's actually a lot harder if you don't have people around you. And even if it's not family, you can actually build quite founding relationships with the friends and housemates, and just sharing how your day went at the end of the day with them, sharing it over the meal. Yeah, is just amazing. That piece alone is definitely shaping your migration journey, because without that, or let's say, even if you're just completing the degree and going back to your home country, having people around you is just definitely making it a lot more exciting. So
yeah, 100%. We always say there's 3 things that a HMO provides: affordability, convenience, community. And I think you just nailed all 3 of them there. What do you do with the common areas in these properties? Because I see a lot of people in Adelaide, sorry, not Adelaide, Melbourne and Brisbane that convert the living area into a bedroom and they just leave a kitchen and a dining area. Are you for or against the common area being kept?
We do have a couple of properties where we have approached the landlords and actually offered them similar conversions of existing common areas into bedrooms. And some of them actually agreed to that. But in terms of converting these common areas, we usually tend to still leave at least one lounge area and at least one kitchen and a dining area, you know. But the properties that have multiple living areas, we did see from the start that they've actually not been used much. So there wasn't much use of them anyways. So I'm definitely up for utilizing the space as much as possible and actually giving people as much people as you can the roof over their head. But in terms of sacrificing, in terms of these communal spaces, I'd still up for at least one of the lounge areas and one of the kitchen and dining areas to be used by the tenants for sure.
That's exactly what we do, mate. A lot of people always ask me, like, is this a short-term thing? Like, is this only working now because the market's going crazy and there's a lack of accommodation right across the country? What's your thought process on that?
Oh, well, I guess as with any other market, there'll be some ups and downs, you know. There is definitely uprising now because of the housing prices, but um, I guess in that sense, we can use UK as an example, you know. If model is working there long term, it doesn't mean that it's not going to work here long term. But it's definitely going to be a challenge, I guess, getting the idea across to the government to actually support this. Um, because the way I see that, the HMOs are still going to lead the country as a number one housing crisis solution. But the government is still lacking, I guess, understanding of that and obviously the cooperation. But I guess you're much better in that space with the, I guess, with how you're moving with your co-living rooms and your initiatives in Perth. But I'm still in a very early stage to be able to actually approach the government and actually come to an agreement and actually, I guess, lead the change in this perception. But also,
I wouldn't put yourself too much down on that, mate, because you're making some impact. 30 houses, let's say 6 rooms on average. You've got between 150 and 180 rooms. So, mate, that's a great start. Like, I dare say that people would sit up and listen to somebody that's had that much impact on the market. That's incredible.
yeah, now thinking over that again, actually, yeah, you're right, because not sure if I mentioned it from the start, but I've actually been recognized as an SA Young Entrepreneur of the Year 2023. So that recognition actually came from what I was doing in the HMO space myself, and the business plan and the expansion ideas I've actually presented back to the community, you know. So I've been recognized by the Business SA Chamber in South Australia as the Young SA Entrepreneur. So definitely open up some of the doors. But those communication channels still need to be set up, you know. But yeah, it's definitely something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, well done, mate. Well done. And where do you want to take the business? How many houses, how many rooms? Have you got a target in sight, or are you just going to keep going and see where you can take it?
Well, you know, it was definitely the numbers were in target as the years went by, but now I'm just focusing on different models as well. Um, Currently, I'm entertaining myself some of the property development as well, where I'm actually securing the property and looking at not only retaining the existing dwelling and use it as a HMO, but also, you know, some of the dealings with the land where I'm just subdividing the land or actually constructing a purpose-built HMO. So I'm definitely entertaining myself and just want to get experience in that field as well as now, since I've got actually ability to actually finance these opportunities now, which is a great help. But in terms of the numbers, I'd say that I'll be aiming for at least 30 properties in 5 years. But that 30 properties, I guess, focus on owning these properties in terms of continuing with the rent-to-rent model. There's nothing wrong with the rent-to-rent model, and I'm sure I'm a great example of that. But it's definitely a great start. But now having more of a founded plans with the industry and stuff, and having that long-term confidence in the property, and I guess having the own property allows you to do more things with it. You can actually convert it more as per the liking of the tenants, where it's a bit harder to negotiate some of these conversions with the landlords. So I'll definitely be focusing into purchasing these properties either myself or actually bringing other investors on board as well. And I guess investing into this mutually. But if we're looking very long term, like in 10 years time, I think there is still some potential for looking at the HMO space on a commercial scale. I'm not sure if you've seen, but companies like the Switch, who have these high-story buildings that provide accommodation not just for the students, but for young professionals as well. I definitely see that the future lies within those. It's definitely going to take some time before I can take a part of something like that. So,
yeah, beautiful, mate. Beautiful. Mate, this podcast has been a shining example of why cash flow is king. I've been saying it for a long time, but a lot of other property investors and educators, they focus on capital growth so much, and they're all tied to jobs for the next 10, 15, 20 years while they're trying to get this capital growth, where you specifically focused on controlling somebody else's property to generate enough cash flow so that you've got income coming in, so that you free up you got more time. And when you got an extra 8, 9, 10 hours a day, you can get creative like you have, mate. So I've really enjoyed this podcast, mate. It's really, I always get excited and inspired by seeing other people going through and building good businesses and taking risks and being rewarded for it as well, mate. So well done in everything you've achieved so far. There's a lot of good things coming from your space, I can see.
thanks for noticing that, Neil. Yeah, I'll just add on to that I guess my focus on the cash flow strategies rather than the capital gains definitely wasn't something I've considered. I just didn't have an option to actually invest in something that would actually capitalize. So it all started with a single property. When I've taken on the property, my first HMO, I only had 10,000, in the pocket. So and I didn't put any more money into that. So I've been able to grow with the cash flow that it was able to generate. But now that it actually generates that cash flow, yes, like you've said, I can actually use that with a bit more creativity and actually not only continue investing into the cash flow deals, but also maximize it with some of the capital gains I can actually get from the asset acquiring as well. So I can definitely get use of the both worlds now, but going back to where I was, I didn't have any other options. So I definitely recommend everyone to follow my journey, I guess. And like you said at the beginning of the podcast, just avoid looking for the excuses, because even at my first year of business, I was still at uni, so I was still a full-time student with a part-time employment. And even at that time frame, I was able to secure 4 properties. When I finished uni, with 2 years of employment, full-time employment, and with other life commitments of like getting married, I was able to secure another, I'd say 15 properties alone in that time frame. So I've definitely had, you can say that I had 2 full-time jobs running at the same time, but I was willing to sacrifice myself for that because I knew what it's going to get me into. And in the last year alone, when I've actually devoted myself full-time to the business, I can actually see some of the benefits already. So no excuses, and we'll definitely continue what I'm doing. So
the side hustle has been and will be strong, mate. So well done.
Thanks for that, Neil.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with other industry experts. So thanks for giving me the chance to talk today.
Beautiful, mate. Join us again next week on the podcast. And remember, every master was once a disaster. Every winner was once a beginner.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you can stay up to date with all cash flow positive property updates.